Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome again to another episode on Talk Architecture, and I'm your host, Naziaty Mohammed Yaacob. Today's topic is on the relevance of Bauhaus. Now, a bit of explanation about Bauhaus from a book that is very much used for modern architecture, references, which is called Modern Architecture, Critical History by Kenneth Frampton. And in here we start with the chapter 14, the Bauhaus, the evolution of an idea, 1919 to 32. So I've mentioned earlier regarding the relevance of the Bauhaus because it started also the movement or the trend of functionalism and how functionalism is depicted in the form of the architecture. And Walter Gropius's building, which is the Bauhaus School at Dessau, is a very good example of that. So in this book, it says that there is a proclamation of the Weimar Bauhaus in 1919, where it says that, let us create a new guild of craftsmen without the class distinctions which raise an arrogant barrier between craftsmen and artists. Together, let us conceive and create the new building of the future, which will embrace architecture and sculpture and painting in one unity, and which will rise one day toward heaven from the hands of a million workers like the crystal symbol of a new faith. In fact, that vision that is just said just now was created in one of the magazines or the periodicals of that time to promote the Bauhaus. Now, of course, we could go into the politics of this, but I'd like to mention that architecture curriculum, the modern one, was influenced by that and the international style. It was previously influenced by the Beaux-Arts. So the Bauhaus was criticizing Beaux-Arts, really, with regard to this proclamation in which there's a new guild of craftsmen without the class distinctions, raise an arrogant barrier between craftsmen and artists. So we're bringing back the artists and the craftsmen. It's such a debate that is ongoing because more and more after that, we have the manufacturing industry, we have mass production of building elements and things that are put together, which we will need to deal with when we are in architecture practice. And of course, these are all governed by the standardization in the country. So not so much the Frank Lloyd Wright or the arts and craft movement version of the artisan or building from scratch or building from your own innovation, but because as time goes by, the cost of materials and the lack of materials, or more so the availability of materials from manufacturing companies, you got to actually be clever about it rather than just customize everything. Also, because the time taken to construct a building would need to have to shortcut the process and so on. But is that about the Bauhaus? But actually the Bauhaus is more of the spirit of looking at architecture in a different way than the previous decade or the previous practices. So I'd like to pose some questions here regarding the Bauhaus. We're trying to move forward here. What is the Bauhaus? Why is the Bauhaus still relevant today? How has the Bauhaus influenced current architecture, education, and practice? And why do we need to still learn about the Bauhaus? A lot of whys there, so bear with me with some of the reactions that I will give and opinions that I will make from my observation and also from reading about this. But before we go into looking into the whys, actually would like to also quote some of the paragraphs from the same book by Kenneth Frampton, in which it's really important that we understand. Originally, the Bauhaus was founded with visions of erecting the cathedral of socialism, and the workshops were established in the manner of the cathedral building lodges or Dombauten. The idea of the cathedral has for the time being receded into the background, and with it certain definite ideas of an artistic nature. Today we must think at best in terms of the house, perhaps even only think so. In the face of the economic plight, it is our task to become pioneers of simplicity. That is, to find a simple form for all life's necessities, which is at the same time respectable and genuine. This was a letter written by Oskar Schlemmer in 1922, recalling the medieval Bauhütte or Mason's Lodge. And if you're looking at the craftsman, we're looking at the nature of creating something based on craft. And architecture is synonymous with any other arts or product design at that time, with the intention of the Bauhaus to unite everything. And that architecture is just like fine art or product design or any of the furniture design, interior design, and so on. So what has architecture have to say for itself in this day and age? Has it taken itself out of this context, taken itself out of this definition where architecture is more of a project management and just gathering of stuff together and creating an architecture that is based on market demands and speculation of the developer? Is architecture just a recycling of ideas and putting together buildings that are made to order and made to be seen fit for consumption? Is there no innovation, no spatial excitement, no sensorial experience that architecture could provide for if it was more intentionally to do with crafting the building rather than just putting things together? So in trying to ask these questions, we also need to actually reflect again on other things that has been said in this book. And here we have the cathedral, or the understanding of trying to build something new. That's why they use the cathedral concept or idea, which is in the past for the medieval age, for the neo-Gothic, neoclassical age in the previous century, which is the 19th century, the Bauhaus. Now in the 20th century, look into the house rather than the cathedral. So that was the intention of the letter written by Schlemmer in 1922. So the author mentioned here that for the first 3 years of its existence, the Bauhaus was dominated by the charismatic presence of the Swiss painter and teacher Johannes Itten, who arrived in the autumn of 1919. So they started the Bauhaus, and this teacher, 3 years later, he started his own art school in Vienna under the influence of Franz Zizek in a highly charged milieu, colored by the anarchic anti-secessionist activities of the painter Oskar Kokoschka and the architect Adolf Loos. Zizek had developed a unique system of instruction based on stimulating individual creativity through the making of collages of different materials and textures. His methods had matured in a cultural climate impregnated with progressive educational theory, from the systems of Froebel and Montessori to the learning through doing movement. Learning through doing is something that I could even find in the Bloom's taxonomy, for example, when we justify architecture education or the architecture education curriculum that we did in the previous decade. So, although this is in the 1920s and 30s, it still influenced the 2000s or the early 2000s, when we still look into the architecture curriculum and find meaning and justification of why we do so. And here it is a reflection of what we're doing. Learning through doing movement, which is initiated by the American John Dewey and vigorously propagated in Germany after 1908 by the educational reformer George Kirchensteiner. So the teaching in Itten's Viennese school and in the Vorkurs, a preliminary course that he initiated in the Bauhaus, was derived from Zizek, although Itten enriched the method with the form and color theory of his own master, Adolf Holzer. Well, I'm kind of fascinated about the Vorkurs, or preliminary course, because I had the chance to be a first-year student or to actually undergone the preliminary course of architecture at University of Technology Malaysia in the 1980s. And I very much feel that we had dealt with a lot of material, we had dealt with all the design elements in terms of patterns, 2D, 3D, lines, planes, and cubes. And there's so much influence that we got from this sort of the preliminary course. Although I have my own criticism about this, in which how it developed throughout the years and how architecture curriculum became much more of, shall we say, placed not only with, in fact, out of fine arts, out of those arts and craft movement, architecture is placed inside the much more built environment movement, or shall we say, service-oriented movement. We see that that is the way society works, and that's the way the architecture industry works. But doesn't mean what I think how things should be done in this day and age make us forget about the Bauhaus. You know what I mean? We take it as it is, and we try to improve the current architecture education and practice, but it doesn't mean that we don't learn, we are not able to learn or to relearn from the past in which what the Bauhaus stood for. Not to mention that I've started this episode to refer to some YouTube videos on the Bauhaus school, which people seem to be interested again. So the aims of Itten's foundation course, mandatory for all first-year students, were to release individual creativity and to enable each student to assess his own particular ability. If the School of Architecture sets out a foundation course as such, so that they could self-assess and self-reflect and be critical of oneself as a creator, even in the first year, then it needs to be continued in all the other years. When I had the chance in the first year at UTM, when the young lecturers decided to do this course, in the second year, it went into practical things like building a guardhouse, playground. The playground one was interesting, which I could actually learn about child psychology as well. But the other project seems to be a bit dry. But there were basic things like houses and small buildings. And in UTM, they encouraged us to use colors, and I did. I tried to use colors. And we also learned about drawing perspectives. everything, of course, is done manually. And this is another debate, obviously, of what is lost now in terms of the Bauhaus learning through doing. If learning through doing is far remote from digital architecture or commanding computer-aided design, is far remote in terms of the learning objectives and learning outcomes, then why have we not investigate further to maintain the whole idea of learning through doing? So up to 1920, when at Itten's request, the artists Schlemmer, Paul Klee, and George Mucher joined the Bauhaus, he taught single-handed 4 separate craft courses in addition to the Vorkurs, while Gerhard Marx and Lionel Feininger gave marginal courses in ceramics and printing respectively. Itten's anarchic position at the time may be gleaned from his 1922 response to a referendum on the provision of state welfare for artists. Itten said, "The mind stands outside any organization, where it has nevertheless been organized, religion and church in brackets. It has become estranged from its innate nature. The state should take care that none of its citizens starve, but it should not support art." So when the state starts supporting art, when the state starts creating architecture schools, then you have this conflict for the artistic nature of a human being. So, yes, the anarchic stance that Itten had and how he looked at what an individual could do in terms of the creativity and innovation crafted and molded by hand and exploring all types of material, glass and ceramics, wood, metal, steel, everything that they could do by hand and shape them, in which the product or whatever that they design is part of architecture, is part of the interior, is part of the building. This leaning towards the arts and craft movement, towards the arts and craft ideal, and leaning towards what all the architects are searching for, is somewhat conflicted with the mass production that ensued later. And now it is no more something that we are skeptical or think about much, because we accepted mass production. We accepted that the building is not to be crafted by hand because it takes so long a time. I'm not trying to do like, shall we say, a nostalgic thing here. What I'm trying to pry open is the conversation with regard to the nature of the artistic individual. When we look at the Bauhaus, when we ask those questions that we proposed earlier, what is the Bauhaus? And people would refer to Itten. People would refer to what the ideas of Itten. And people would also refer to all the other teachers at the Bauhaus who made it a point to look at architecture and having to deal with the client to influence them that what the architect says is the best advice. So architects have been relegated to just another team member to process the building design and to get it enabled it to be built with a team of other consultants in this day and age. But at that time, the architect has some control over the vision and the product at hand. And this was the idealism that had started at the Bauhaus. What I would like to also ask about the Bauhaus, what is the Bauhaus, is that, has it changed much? Of course, we think about it, that it's changed a lot. I even said that just now, but has it really changed in terms of the training of the architect? We have in this day and age schools of architecture that leans toward the Bauhaus ideals. And that whatever that happens, when they go into the architecture industry out there, dealing with clients, it's up to them to actually deal with the conflicts at hand. We're not merely servants or the service providers of the building industry. We're also the artisans. We are also the ones that create. But more and more, the architect would put up their hands and say, I'm really not happy with this. I was trained to be dealing with a sense of, artisanal sensibilities, a sense of working with hands, material sense, constructional sense. But now when I work and I go to the office, I just have to process whatever it is that the client wants. And I have very little, actually, in commanding anything, in being able to be master at anything. And I'm just merely one of the team members. And a rubber stamp, so to speak, as a licensed architect, that the building is fit to be erect. So,
we're a history podcast for Melbourne lovers, from design to crime. We talk to experts about the city you love. Check out Look History in the Eye, produced by the Victorian State Archives.
You could shoot a gun in Lygon Street in the 70s at 7:30 at night and you wouldn't kill anybody.
She immediately responded with, have you heard of Fanny Finch?
One, it's relief, and two, then it's excitement, because I knew that these structures were rare.
This summer, learn Melbourne history with Look History in the Eye. Tap the screen to start listening.
Here it follows that Iton's anti-authoritarian, even mystical position was substantially reinforced in 1921 by his extended stay in the Marsdorfsnen Center at Harleiburg near Zurich. He returned in the middle of the year to convert his pupils and his colleague Moshe to the rigors of this updated version of an archaic Persian religion. So, there's the individual also influencing the syllabus or the architecture education here. In this case, the cult demanded an austere lifestyle, periodic fasting and vegetarian diet flavored with cheese and garlic. Well, I won't really go into this, but basically the physical and spiritual well-being is essential to creativity, and thus is a holistic thing that Iton is trying to convey or trying to influence his charges. So it was a time when there was the World War I and a lot of effect to society based on what is happening around in Europe. And other things emerge as well, such as the Dutch to steel. And this are influential to what is happening at the Bauhaus. Also the Russian painter Vasily Kandinsky. Now I wanted to concentrate on only in this first part of the Bauhaus. What is the Bauhaus, how it started, and how after that architecture become different from it was in the Beaux-Arts. And there came international style, there came functionalism after that, and all the other isms or all the other trends that is offshoot from the modern movement and the start of the modern movement, such as the brutalism and other tropical architecture later on. What I'm trying to say is that this was energetic times. These were times when people actually wanted to repair the chaos and disorder into order and create a new meaning to architectural forms in cities and in towns. And the influence of that grew, and the international style influence other countries, apart from European countries, throughout the world as we know it. Even in Malaysia, I can find a lot of these examples of the international style. And functionalism as it is, you see rectangular buildings with very well ventilated, using the building elements, brise soleil, écrate, and shall we say breezeways, corridors that are well ventilated. Even the hospital, the general hospital in Kuala Lumpur, is influenced and can actually exist and function well with cross ventilation, natural ventilation, without using air conditioning. So we have right there examples of this period of time where functionalism was the order of the day and influenced international style. And also we adopt this vision, the modern movement vision, without much question to whether we want to change the form. Often the form was as such, rectangle, cubes, squares, or geometrical in order, and nothing to do with curves. When curves come in the regional styles, it's to do with the lay of the land, topography, and later on we had the postmodernism architecture and how colors and a lot of other influences came to fore. And also pop architecture, popular architecture. And people dealt with regionalism in a way that they look into the materials as well, and kind of national inspiration that is being discussed in this book as well, in Modern Architecture, A Critical History by Kenneth Frampton. Highly recommended. It's a textbook for everyone if you want to deal with modern architecture. So we go back to the question about the Bauhaus, and we sort of get the idea what is the Bauhaus and how the Bauhaus had influenced its ideas through the international style all over the world. And architecture education followed as well. Why is the Bauhaus still relevant today? And this question is, obviously the answer is that not so long ago, in 1980, when I was a student, a first-year student, the Bauhaus was really there, being taught as they wanted it to be in the 1930s. But of course, with the national aspiration, Malaysia at that time wanting more of technocrats and later on bureaucrats rather than, shall we say, intellectuals, we just rigorously learned about architecture education in learning through doing, which is what Bauhaus wanted to happen with Itten's idea even. So we still have that, but a lot of dependence on digital softwares made us not able to explore the inner nature of the artisan, the nature of the individual who can create architecture. It's kind of like got lost in this day and age. So we need to return to the original idea of the Bauhaus. We need to return to the holistic thinking of the individual being able to explore all sorts of material. And yet, the architect is different. Their role is different now during the times of the Bauhaus. The architect does not influence the architectural product as much as before. The architect is part of a team in which to process seemingly the same ideas all over. as being someone who is like a service provider. And so we kind of lose it. And how much are we losing when we're losing this part of us, of being just a service provider, just being someone who could facilitate and rubber stamp the drawing so that it can be built. We're losing something here, and that is one of the things that I wish to discuss further with regard to the relevance of the Bauhaus and the relevance of functionalism in architecture. Thank you very much for listening to this half-hour monologue or discussion, which I hope that we can take away and create conversations of such nature in the future. Thank you very much.